December 14th. Stoofer. I rose around noon to find Davin in the living room reading a book. No chores today? Davin looked up and smiled. Ulf said that there was nothing pressing for me to do today, and so I should take the day off. I laughed. That sounded like Ulf. Have you eaten? Breakfast, yes, but as for lunch, no. Well, how about I make you some lunch? I'm pretty hungry myself. He hopped up and followed me to the kitchen, clearly liking the idea. I opened the fridge, looking around for groceries and seeing a gaping hole that made me furrow my brow. I had put leftovers in the fridge from the night before that were suddenly gone. I had put some scree and rye in the icebox, thinking it would make a nice lunch when I got up, but suddenly it was gone. The loaf of bread on the counter was also nowhere to be seen, and I marveled at the boy's appetite. As he came walking in, I looked at my little brother, trying to keep the scowl off my face as he moved up beside me. Got a little hungry last night, did you? His look of confusion put me off. What do you mean? There's a whole meal's worth of leftovers missing. And did you have to eat a whole loaf of bread? I had meat and cheese in the fridge you could have put with it. He shook his head and looked baffled. I didn't eat any of that. I assumed you came in hungry and had some food. Now, I was as confused as he was. No, but if you didn't eat the food, who did? I asked him if Ulf had been in the house, figuring he was the source of my missing food. The big Icelander was usually a bottomless pit, and I'd heard his mother bemoaning her grocery bill more than once. Ulf took after his forebears, a big, muscled Nordic bruiser, though more prone to smiles than scowls, and he could clean out a pantry all on his own. Davin said he had come in, but only for a few minutes. I went to the bathroom and came back to find him gone. I nodded, understanding who had eaten my leftovers. I loved Ulf like a brother, but he could certainly be trying sometimes. Well, I suppose we should go see if Sigrin has anything we can eat for lunch. Davin hadn't met Sigrin yet, and I smiled as I remembered my first meeting with the woman. I had been 16 and away from home for the first time. Ulf had taken to me immediately, calling me cousin and bringing me into his games, and Arnar had warmed to me quickly when he realized I was no pampered Welsh brat. Sigrin, however, had been my first real comfort when I arrived. Arnar was gruff but fair, and Ulf was a little more energetic than I strictly liked in a stranger. Sigrin and her cats, and her kitchen full of good smells and warm meals, became a place that I could go when I was feeling homesick or needed a moment to breathe. She must have sensed this because she treated me like a lost lamb that needed to be fattened up so I could survive the cold winters. Within a month, I was thick as thieves with Ulf, his energy having rubbed off on me, and Sigrin's kitchen remained a place that I sought refuge from time to time. Arnar's longhouse always looked a little odd as it sat cheek and jowl with his very English-looking barn. We came around the back, and as I walked into the very familiar kitchen, I heard Sigrin humming as she fixed lunch. She smiled when she saw us, wrapping me in a hug that I couldn't help but return. Sigrin had always reminded me of the wife character from David the Gnome, her round face made for smiling and her skirts always homemade, covered by a thick apron. She was short and round and always had a smile and some food for me or her hungry son when we came in from work. She offered Davin a hug, and to my surprise he took it. Our mother had never been a big hugger, but it seemed that Davin felt the same warmth that I had on my first visit. She sat us at her table and fixed us some lamb stew from a pot on the stove, asking if her husband paid me so poorly that I couldn't keep food in the house for a growing boy. It was said in jest, and I took no offense. Growing indeed, but it appears that my pantry was raided by a hungry bear last night. I woke up to find my leftovers missing, and a whole loaf of bread, too. She laughed. Sounds like you've been visited by Stoofer, or by Ulf, more likely, she said, as she put down rye bread and cheese as well. Is he one of the Yule lads? Davin asked, and Sigrin ruffled his hair. He certainly is. He's short, and he eats the crusts of bread left over in the pans. He often takes the pans, too. Were you missing any of those? I shook my head, slurping up the savory stew. I haven't checked yet. I was more worried about my leftovers. He doesn't come till tonight, though, right? She nodded, Better lock up your leftovers after dark, or see them gone by the likes of that rogue. Does he bother you much? I asked, seeing her gleaming cookware hanging from the ceiling. Some, but Siegfried usually runs the lads off, she smiled at the fat ginger cat sitting by the fire. He always keeps the Yule lads from making too much mischief. The fat Tom was sleeping peacefully on the hearth as she bustled about, opening a sleepy eye every now and again when someone got too close. Even by the standards of house cats, Siegfried was a big one. He was 50 pounds of ginger tomcat, and he had sired many kittens in his time. Most of them still lingered about the house or the yard, but they all paid their respects to Siegfried when he happened to be looking for a sunny spot to sleep. I could use a fine cat like that, I commented, feeling Frigg rub against my leg before bending down to pet her. Well, why don't you borrow one of his litter? I'm sure Grendel would be happy to stay with you through the holidays, she joked. I looked over at the lean, black Tom, currently stalking one of his brothers, and made an uncertain noise. Grendel had earned that name fairly. He was an angry cat with a savage disposition, and he didn't like anyone. The cat tolerated Sigrin, because he knew that any slight to her would be answered by Siegfried's swiping paw or Arnar's stiff work boots. But I didn't like the idea of trying to transport that little terror to my house. My arms would be bloody ribbons before I made it to the midway point, and I started to decline. Davin, however, made the point moot. He walked over to the black Tom, and the cat looked up with surprise. No one came near Grendel if they could help it. He was unpredictable, and I was shocked when the cat didn't immediately hiss at him. The dark shade watched Davin approach, uncommonly quiet as he reached down to pick him up. I was expecting violence, the hurt yells of my brother when the cat scratched him, but he lifted him into his arms as easy as any cat within the house. I tensed, expecting him to get a swipe for surprising the angry beastie, but Grendel only stiffened a little before melting into my brother's arms with a loud purr. Sigrin looked as surprised as I was when Davin came back to the table, Grendel cradled in his arms like a baby. Well, it appears I've seen everything now. I reached a shaky hand over to see what sort of Christmas miracle this was, and when Grendel hissed and swiped at me, I knew he hadn't had too strong a change of heart. Davin carried Grendel home with us an hour later, the sooty devil hanging from his arm like a living shadow. I glanced at the Tom mistrustfully as Davin carried him inside. I didn't know what to expect from Grendel, besides having my ankle swiped from under any surface he decided to hide beneath, and made a mental note to wear boots inside for a while. Whether or not he could help against the lads, I didn't know, but I was willing to find out. The rest of the evening went about as well as expected. Davin and I watched some TV, Davin enjoying the local shows, though he wasn't yet fluent in Icelandic. Grendel sat on his lap the whole time, seeming to be taken with my little brother. I asked him how he had managed to charm the little creature, and Davin just shrugged. He petted the cat absent-mindedly, and this was the calmest I had ever seen the temperamental feline. I've always been good with cats. At home, I could get even the meanest alley cats to come for a pet. It's a gift, I guess. I nodded, looking down at the purring Grendel and agreeing. When bedtime came, the cat snuggled down with Davin, a pair of green eyes floating in the darkness. I locked eyes with him for a moment, and it was clear that he wouldn't let anything happen to my brother as he slept. I started to close the door, but I left it cracked instead after remembering why the Tom was here. He would need to get out if something came lurking tonight, and lurking it came. I slid into my own bed as the living room clock struck 10, wanting my own sleep if I was going to work again tomorrow night. I was awakened later that night by a loud clang from the kitchen, the sound of cookware sliding noisily out of my cupboard. It sounded as if someone had come looking for more than bread crusts. I sighed as I realized the cat was going to be no help. I grabbed the walking stick I had used for hikes and started making my way up the dark hall. From the kitchen, I could hear the clang of pans as they fell from the cabinet, and a low chuckle that crept under the bangs. I held the stick between my hands, preparing to swing as I came around the corner. If I swept low, I might manage to sweep him in a rush. Maybe even catch a few if they were all here. Peeking around the corner, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, I could see a small back as it rifled through the pans in my open cupboard. He was a small one, smaller than either of the others I'd seen, and looked barely over 3 feet tall. It was naked, except for a covering of metal over its bits and its chest. It clattered a little as it moved, the pans strung across him with twine or metal strands, and they bumped against the cookware as he rustled against them. I crept into the kitchen, the little creature too intent on his pilfering to take any notice of me as I slunk in. I had the stick raised, ready for a strike, but the thing suddenly spun to glower at me, freezing me in place with an angry glare. God, it was so ugly. It looked like a potato that some child had carved badly, using a spoon or something blunt. I couldn't move, the little thing holding me in place as easy as it held my muffin tin. But it appeared that someone else didn't have the same problem. From behind the little thing, I could see a pair of green eyes as Grendel prepared to leap. Grendel hit him hard in the center of the back, sending him to the ground with a clatter of cookware. The little troll yowled and tried to roll away, but the cat dogged his heels relentlessly. I kept my stick up, wanting to swing now that my fear had passed, but not wanting to smack the cat in the process. The two rolled, Stoofer swinging his little club arms at the cat as he squealed like a trapped rat. Stoofer pushed him off suddenly, and I saw my chance. I swung the staff like a hockey stick and watched the little creature spin away into the living room. Stoofer squealed as he pelted into the dark room, and Grendel glowered at me as if to say, "Great, now I have to catch him again." We both lit out after him, listening intently as we stalked him. My eyes scanned the dark living room, trying to find any sound that might give the little hellion away. He was covered in metal, for God's sake. How hard could he be to find? Grendel's ears flicked, hearing something slight, and he leapt towards the couch. Stoofer made a squeaky sound, scampering out from behind the couch, and bumped into the end table as he looked to see if the cat was behind him. I lost them for half a second, and then there was a yowl and a scrambling of tiny feet. Grendel skidded on the carpeted floor as he chased the incredibly fat little creature. It wobbled as it ran, obese but still quick on those stubby legs, and I could see that it now had the knife in its tiny hand. It was little better than a sewing needle in the creature's little grip, but I didn't want the cat to get hurt as it tried to protect us. Grendel hunched, ready to pounce, its tail swinging back and forth as it waited for just the right time. They were like gunfighters, standing ready to draw when the time was right, before my bumbling ass got involved again. I jumped and brought the stick down, both stumbling away as it came between them. Stoofer chuckled and lunged for the door, disappearing into the cold as it ran from this unwinnable situation. Grendel set his displeased eyes on me again, but I told him to go back to bed as I stomped to the door and locked it. The dark shadow went back to Davin's room, its tail flicking in agitation, and I went back to my own bed. It had been a long night, but it seemed that Grendel could hold his own against the nimble lad. As I drifted off, though, I wondered if he would fare so well against more of them, if they showed up in force. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for night 3 of the Yule Lad's Diaries. Tonight, we got to meet Stoofer, or Stubby in the English. Stubby's an interesting character. He's the shortest of all the lads, and he steals both food and he steals frying pans sometimes. Some of the artwork for him has him actually armored, like I had said, in like muffin tins and pot lids, and it's kind of cool. There's another one that comes up later. I think it's Pot Scraper, or Pot Licker, who also steals unwashed pots, so I like to imagine these two as like a little armored duo. As you can see, he's definitely interested in a little bit more than cookware this time around. Well, if your hunger for spooky stories isn't quite sated, might I suggest my playlist of holiday short stories. They're the perfect tales for tree trimming or gift wrapping or just feeling that good old chill that shoots up your spine during a little holiday horror. Today's recommendation is Mice in the Walls, which came out a couple of days ago. It's a classic Christmas tale about getting a little bit more than you bargained for when you talk to things best left alone. If you'd like to read the collection from Fall Frights and Winter Chills, you can head down to the link below and pick up your own copy from Amazon. You can find lots of other books there. I'm sure they're the perfect gift for the horror reader in your family. Anything to fit in a stocking or under a tree or just on their favorite bookshelf. Before we go, I'd love to thank my wonderful, awesome, beautiful patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Martha, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $25 a month, you can get a custom piece of work from me, Dr. Plague. That's right, for just $25 a month, you can receive up to 5 pages of a custom work piece by yours truly. I'm open to most genres and, most character development plots, so if that interests you, come on down to Patreon and we can talk over details. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening and a spooky holiday season.